With the best all-inclusive vacation deals to Mexico and the Caribbean, booking your getaway with Cheap Caribbean Vacations means you have more freedom to do your deal. Whether you want to enjoy snorkeling, endless margaritas, and more, or simply soak up the sun and sand in a tropical paradise, Cheap Caribbean Vacations has your deal for that. Plan and book the exact getaway you want at exactly the right price for you by using our exclusive budget beach finder. Or find a featured all-inclusive package to Oasis Hotels and Resorts and do your deal at cheapcaribbean.com.
When it comes to playtime, never let your squad down. Unlock elite gaming tech at Lenovo.com. Push your gameplay beyond performance with 13th Gen Intel Core processors. Upgrade to smooth, high-quality streaming with Intel Wi-Fi 6E. And maximize game performance with enhanced overclocking. Win the tech search and head to Lenovo.com.
Lenovo.
Did you just hear those ads? Do you not want to? Because Crimelines is available ad-free on Supercast, Patreon, and Apple subscriptions. You will also get access to my other twice-monthly podcast, Beyond the Files. That's where I take cases that were covered on Forensic Files and tell you the rest of the story. Links to those platforms are in the show notes. Sydney Loofe went on a date and never came back. After two persons of interest were named in her disappearance, they posted a video to Facebook that would be only the first of multiple stories told. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. I hope everyone's having a good week. The case we're talking about today is one out of Nebraska that I followed when it first happened. But somehow I did not know all of these details that I found when looking into it all at once and holistically. We are going to start with Sydney Loofe, who was born in 1993 in central Nebraska. And around 2000, when she was 7, the family moved to Neely, which is a small town about 2.5 hours northwest of Omaha. Both of Sydney's parents were educators, and Sydney and her two siblings grew up prioritizing the school community as their community. Sydney played multiple sports, but as she grew, something was not quite right, and she was diagnosed with scoliosis, which is when the vertebrae form a curve rather than being straight. Sometimes they can even corkscrew. The most common form of scoliosis develops during puberty growth spurts, and that's pretty much what happened here with Sydney. While scoliosis can have a range of severity, Sydney's was bad enough that it impacted her ability to play sports, and it did affect her gait a bit. I have a child who developed some health issues as a teenager that limited her activities, and I know I can say all of the platitudes like, Sydney didn't let this slow her down, but I feel like that would be ignoring the private struggle that I'm sure she dealt with. So while Sydney found ways to do all of the things she loved, like fishing and playing golf, I'm sure she had her moments where it was just hard. And I know that because my daughter had those moments, but a lot of the world did not see that part. After graduating from high school, Sydney decided to move to Lincoln, 2.5 hours from her hometown, and she was able to transfer her job. She worked at the Menards hardware store near her home and was able to move to a store in Lincoln. So that's the perfect scenario. She was able to spread her wings in a bigger city, but she had the stability of a job she knew and enjoyed. Sydney worked hard and she enjoyed the benefits of independence, sharing what she had with those who needed it. At least 3 times in the 6 or 7 years she lived in Lincoln, she let friends live with her while they were having a rough patch. One time it was a coworker who was really struggling, and she didn't just give him a place to stay while he got on his feet. She sat him down and taught him how to budget. She told her friends that everyone needed help at times, and if she was the one who was in the position to help, she would do it. After several years in Lincoln, Sydney was talking about possibly leaving her job at Menards. It wasn't that she wasn't doing well there. She was making ends meet, but she started thinking about finding something that was more of a career path with greater future potential. She was 24, so she was at that age where you're really looking at your goals and how to get there. Another thing Sydney was looking to the future with were relationships. She had a great group of friends, but she hadn't met anyone special. She wasn't the type to be out at the clubs or the bars. She preferred a quieter life, hanging out with friends, watching movies, or doing puzzles, or even just running errands together. She wasn't really out there meeting people, and she was busy with work and friends, so she did what a lot of people do when she got on a dating app. Things were hit or miss on that end at first, but on November 11th, while Sydney was visiting her family in her hometown, she got a message on Tinder from a woman named Audrey who she matched with. Audrey was just about her age, and she lived outside of Lincoln, so the two started chatting on the app to get to know each other a little bit. That same weekend, while spending some time with her parents, Sydney confided in them that her mental health wasn't in the best place. She had dealt with depression since high school, which is not uncommon, particularly with teens who are dealing with physical health issues, and it seemed like it had just gotten worse recently. So her parents helped her get an appointment in Lincoln for Monday, November 13th. To support her, Sydney's parents went to Lincoln with her on Sunday night and left after the doctor's appointment on Monday. Knowing Sydney was struggling, her mother, Susie, kept in closer touch with her than normal over the next couple of days. They usually talked about 3 or 4 times a week, but there was a lot more back and forth, even over text, on November 13th and the 14th. It was on the evening of November 14th that Sydney had a date with Audrey from the dating app. The next day, Sydney told her friend Tara that they had a good date, good enough that they were going to go out again that night. Sydney then sent a picture of Audrey to one of her friends, and it seemed like Sydney was pretty excited about the potential there. And Audrey seemed to feel likewise, messaging Sydney, "Good night, gorgeous," after their first date. Sydney was at work all day on the 15th, so she didn't have a chance to reply to some texts that her mom had sent her. Then she left work around 6 p.m. to go get ready for that date, and before she left the house, she took a cute selfie and posted to Snapchat, "Ready for my date." When Sydney's mom saw this post, she did exactly what I would have done, and she screenshotted it and sent it to Sydney asking what date. Sydney didn't respond because she had already left with Audrey. The next day, Thursday, November 16th, Sydney was scheduled to work again, but she didn't show up. She had never no-call, no-showed before, so they tried to reach her, and they couldn't. Other friends also had issues getting in touch with Sydney, and people started reaching out to her sister to let the family know. They then called the Lincoln police to report Sydney missing around 5 p.m. The next day, the family drove to Lincoln to see what was going on and check out Sydney's apartment. The first thing they noticed was that Sydney's vehicle was in the parking lot. And then, inside the apartment, they noticed that Sydney's cat's dishes were empty. She never would have left her cat without food or water, and she would never be out of touch for 2 days, so this increased everybody's concern. In talking with her friends, it was clear that the last anyone had heard from Sydney was when she left for her date with Audrey. One friend had that picture of Audrey that she had been sent, so another friend, Brooklyn, set up her own fake Tinder profile and filled it out so it would interest someone like Audrey. Make sure you have friends like this in your life, the ones who will go trolling for leads should the need arise, because this worked. On November 17th, Brooklyn was matched with Audrey and then swiped in whatever direction you're supposed to swipe. I actually don't know. I've been married since dial-up internet, so I have no experience in this realm. But Brooklyn swiped and started talking to Audrey, but she didn't ask about Sydney directly because if Audrey was involved in Sydney's disappearance, which Brooklyn suspected, she didn't want to tip her off. Instead, she asked things like, "Oh, where do you work? Are you in school? Where did you grow up?" Just normal get-to-know-you questions that Audrey answered rather vaguely. Instead of saying where she worked, she said she worked for a financial institution. She wasn't giving much away, but Brooklyn was able to get Audrey to give her her phone number. And Brooklyn took that phone number and handed it directly over to the police, who were able to identify the owner of the phone as Bailey Boswell, which was the real name of Audrey, who lived 30 miles outside of Lincoln in Wilbur, Nebraska. This location was an immediate red flag because when the investigators had pinged Sydney's cell phone, it had last bounced off a tower in Wilbur on the night of November 15th, and then it went offline. So, of course, the investigators called Bailey on the 17th, and she said she went out with Sydney twice, and after the date on the 15th, Sydney asked Bailey to drop her off at a friend's house in Lincoln. They made plans to get together over the weekend, but according to Bailey, Sydney had ghosted her. On November 18th, thinking Sydney may be with Bailey against her will, the police conducted a welfare check at her basement apartment in Wilbur. No one answered when the deputy knocked, but the landlord, who lived upstairs, let him in to do a cursory look around. He noticed the house really smelled strongly of bleach. The landlord, Jennifer, told the police that the bleach smell was worse a couple of days before. They had first noticed it late on November 15th, but then on the 16th, Jennifer went to take her daughter to an orthodontist appointment, and when she got back, she could smell it as soon as she pulled into the garage. The smell was strongest on the stairs to the basement apartment, and this was a problem since Jennifer was very sensitive to bleach and would break out in hives because of it, so they never had it in the house. They had to open all of the windows to try to air the house out, even though it was chilly in November. Jennifer also let the deputy know that Bailey, who was 23, wasn't the only tenant in the basement apartment. She lived there with her fiancé, 51-year-old Aubrey Trail. So Bailey had an older male fiancé, but she was on Tinder looking for young women. According to the landlord, the two had lived in the basement for about 5 months, and they didn't really talk or socialize much. They worked in antiques dealing, so they traveled a lot, and as far as November 15th went, the night of the date, the landlord, Jennifer, said that she didn't notice anything strange. Her college-age son was in town, and he was sleeping in a basement bedroom, but he told the police that he didn't get home that night until after 10 p.m. and hadn't heard anything. The following day, November 19th, the police came back with a search warrant to do a full look at the apartment. Bailey and Aubrey had not come back, and everything looked the same as it did the day before. Nothing stood out as immediately suspicious, like blood stains, but the odor of bleach was still present, and there were 3 mostly empty bleach bottles on the dryer. They also noticed that it looked like the walls had been recently cleaned, and the basement was very cold. The air conditioning unit actually froze up because they were running it as low as it went while it was cold outside. Additionally, the police found a handwritten note about how to encrypt a phone, a receipt from Dollar General, and a receipt from a small local grocery store. The Dollar General receipt was from 5 p.m. on November 15th, so before Bailey picked Sydney up for their second date, and someone had bought 4 roasting pans, trash bags, and bleach. At the grocery store, which that receipt was time-stamped for 11:30 the next morning, someone bought more bleach and more trash bags. The investigators ended up taking several items in for DNA testing, like the bed sheet, and left the apartment. Meanwhile, they were looking into the backgrounds of Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail as they could not find them. Bailey had told lies as Audrey, saying things like how she was from Missouri when she wasn't. She had lived there, but she was actually from Iowa, where she grew up in a pretty tight-knit family. Like Sydney, Bailey was an athlete in high school, and she ended up signing with AIB College of Business in 2012 to play basketball with them. But she never finished school because she dropped out due to 2 things. 1, being substance abuse, and 2, being in a physically abusive relationship. That relationship produced a child who Bailey and her ex lost custody of, and she was being raised by Bailey's parents by the time Bailey ended up in a relationship with Aubrey Trail. and that relationship was odd at best. The two met at some point in 2016, and the evidence would show that they met through Backpage when Bailey advertised that she was looking for a sugar daddy, and Aubrey, a man who was 28 years older than her, answered the ad. Bailey would later assert that her daughter's father put that ad on Backpage and had forced her into things she didn't want to do. But however it happened exactly, Bailey ended up believing her daughter's father at some point, and she and Aubrey were together. Now, Aubrey Trail had a long criminal history, particularly things for robbery and fraud-related crimes. It started when he was a juvenile, when he was in and out of juvenile detention, foster homes, and group homes, and continued into his adult life. He worked as an antiques dealer, traveling around the country to buy things, fix or clean them up, and then reselling them online or at markets, and Bailey joined him in this activity. This business meant that Aubrey and Bailey had traveled through the country a lot, so when they couldn't find them and believed they were essentially on the run, the authorities knew they would be comfortable in multiple states. They were going to need some help tracking them down, so they put out a warrant for Aubrey for being a felon in possession of a dangerous weapon, and Bailey already had a warrant for a failure to appear on marijuana possession charges. These are not the types of charges that usually have them hunting you down, but because these were persons of interest in the disappearance of a young woman, these warrants allowed the FBI to come in. After putting it out on social media and in the mainstream media that they were looking for Aubrey and Bailey as persons of interest, the two did the oddest thing that they could have done. They posted a 9-minute-long video telling their side of the story. In this video, Aubrey's face is mostly off-screen, while Bailey's whole face is on-screen. She has a hoodie pulled up and large sunglasses on, but she is sitting there largely expressionless, just staring into the camera. I am going to go ahead and play that audio now because it's pretty good quality, so you can just hear the story straight from them. Or should I say, story number 1. The only editing I've done is to speed them up a little bit to get through it, since it's basically 6 minutes of Aubrey playing the victim, and then Bailey saying a little bit about what happened, and then Aubrey playing the victim again.
Good morning, Lincoln and Omaha and probably several other places. This is Aubrey Trail, and this is Bailey Boswell. I guess y'all also know her as Audrey. But we spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers and the news and everything else, so we thought it was time we had our say. We're not trying to defend anything. We're not trying to make you believe anything. We just feel we should get to say our side since everyone else gets to say theirs. Unlike the Lincoln Police Department and Saline County Police Department and all those folks, everything we're going to tell you, you're going to be able to pick up the phone or have a newspaper pick up the phone and very easily verify it. I am going to talk for a minute, then Bailey here is going to tell you about her 2 dates with Sydney, and we'll go from there. The Lincoln Police Department apparently wants everyone to believe that we're hiding, that we haven't talked to them, that we're avoiding them. Actually, we've spoken to the Lincoln Police Department a couple of times. We also, through my attorney, Doug Mertz in Falls City, Nebraska, please verify, we both wrote long statements and sent to the Lincoln Police Department telling them everything we know. We also, the day before Thanksgiving, which will be the 22nd, we repeatedly called the Lincoln Police Department when they were trying to contact us. After about 10 phone calls, please have a newspaper, ask for they record everything. We were told to quit blowing up their phone, even though we told them, hey, do you understand that we're the people you're looking for? They said, you've called here several times, we will get back to you when we can. So, that's how that went. They're telling you that they have all these leads, that Sydney was last seen in Wilbur and such. What they're not telling you is that we are the two people who gave them all these leads. I called the Falls City Police Department because they went to my ex's house and looking for me, so I called to find out what was going on. Apparently they did not know my address in Wilbur. They thought I still lived in Falls City. I talked to the sergeant there. I told him what my address was in Wilbur. That night they went to my house and searched our house. we found out that on the 21st, I think it was, or the 20th, the county attorney in Wilbur, Saline County, filed a warrant against me for possession of a firearm, which is insane. I have never owned a firearm in 20 years. The next day, according to the papers, the warrant was withdrawn, but the Lincoln paper is not telling you that the warrant was withdrawn because there was no firearm in my house. But they will have you believe that. Several other things. I guess the FBI and the U.S. Marshals and all that good stuff, and a lot of other people with a lot of initials that I have no idea what means is investigating, looking for us or whatever. We were at our house 4 days ago. No one showed up. We were in Wilbur. We've been to Wilbur twice. We have a young lady with us for a week, which is Bailey's sometimes girlfriend. The Omaha police started calling her phone, telling her pretty much that she's in danger with us. So we took her home the day before Thanksgiving. She was with us when Bailey and I were trying to call the Lincoln Police Department. She can verify this if you want her name. I guess friend us and message us on Facebook, because as we know stuff, you will know stuff, because we're not cutting, editing, or anything. If we make a slip on this video and say something that you find incriminating, please let us know. You know, and you've already crucified us in the newspapers. You've already crucified us on Facebook. You know, in America, I sure thought it was a trial first, but I guess not. You've heard all of this stuff about my criminal history. All true. Been convicted of bad checks and forgery and all that good stuff, but never been convicted of anything like, I guess I'm a person of interest on now. And oh yeah, the Lincoln Police Department failed to tell you that me and Bailey do about $100,000 a year business in antiques on eBay, the antique malls in Lincoln, Omaha, all this stuff. They will have you believe that I'm still just a criminal running around. But you know, I don't really need to explain all of that, because as far as I know, I'm not wanted for anything. I'm a person of interest, and I'm not really running from anything. I mean, naturally, I can't go home now because my house has been swarmed, searched, and I'm being looked for. But, and I assume that I have a warrant out of state somewhere now, so that kind of cancels that out. So this has pretty much cost me my life, and I appreciate that from the Lincoln Police Department and the FBI and all those other agencies. But I pray for Sydney. I hope she's found soon. I wish the family the best. I'm sorry that she wasn't with you on Thanksgiving, and that's pretty much all I can say for now. Here's Bailey to tell you whatever she wants to. I'm fixing to step aside and get out of this. Thank you for listening.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and a few other names because I have warrants, but this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney, and I'm just kind of want to tell you what I've already told the Lincoln Police more than one time. I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off. I dropped her off at home, picked her up the next night at her house. We drove around, smoked weed again, made our way to my house where we smoked wax and shatter, and I gave her a 1/4 ounce of some really good weed. I went to take her home, and she asked me to drop her off at a friend's house, so I did so. I gave her my number. We were planning to go to the casino that weekend. I haven't heard from her since. I really don't even know what else to say. I've been seeing all this stuff on the news presses and the magazines and the news, and I guess I just want the family to know that I'm truly sorry, and I didn't have anything to do with this, and I hope that Sydney is found very soon. She is a sweet, amazing girl. I don't know. Babe, do you have anything else to say?
I hope also that Sydney's found soon. We wish the family the best. We're sorry you're going through this. As far as all this stuff that the police department is putting in the papers, putting on the news, what they're feeding to the media, what they want the media to know, there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing she can do about that, because the police department is going to do what suits them best. Yeah, I know that's coming from a criminal, so, you know, you'll believe what you will as far as the police department is concerned. But as far as I'm concerned, what they're chasing us around like dogs, I wish the family the best. I mean, no disrespect to anyone. I wish Sydney the best. But as far as the police department, fuck you.
Yeah.
This video obviously blew things up on social media even more than before. It kind of reminded me of the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. The discovery of the body occurred because of a social media post the killers made about it, and that post blew up with everyone wondering what was going on. And so a lot of people following the Dee Dee Blanchard case started following it on Facebook before the body was even found. Now, that's not to say that case wouldn't have been big without that piece, but it really is the sort of thing that gets eyes on cases early on. Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive that I use in pretty much every episode of Crimelines I make. They have more than 1 billion pages from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. If you are captivated by stories of the past, if you like to get in there and get all the little details of true crime cases as they developed, newspapers.com is basically a time machine for you. It provides unparalleled access to 3 centuries of history. You can dive into their extensive archives to experience history as it happened, looking at news, events, and even everyday moments that shaped the world around us. Because their search feature is so easy to use, you can filter your results by date, location, specific paper, category, and more. Newspapers.com has this great clipping feature, which makes it easy to save and share whatever you found. Come explore 1 billion pages and make infinite discoveries today on newspapers.com. Use the code CRIMELINES for an exclusive 20% discount on your subscription. Again, that is code CRIMELINES for an exclusive 20% discount. All right, listeners, are you ready to uncover the secret to youthful skin and vibrant health? Just like a gripping true crime story, the mystery of aging has captivated us for centuries. What if I told you that the answer lies in your body's own collagen? But as I have learned firsthand in recent years, as we age, this vital protein diminishes, leaving us with fine lines, wrinkles, and less elasticity. Enter Native Path Collagen, your ally in the quest for a radiant complexion. Their collagen peptides pack a powerful punch, supporting not just your skin and hair, but your joints, bones, and gut health too. Just imagine a smoother, more youthful you, all while getting lost in the world of chilling crime stories. Okay, true crime listeners, ready to crack the code? Head to getnativepath.com/crimelines for a special discount on your first order. Plus, they're offering my listeners bundles that are not available on their website at up to 45% off, plus free shipping. Native Path Collagen, where the truth is just a scoop away. Their single ingredient formula has thousands of 5-star reviews, over 5 million jars sold, and over 1 million happy customers. It's completely unflavored and it dissolves easily into coffee, smoothies. You can even bake with it. Every order comes with a 365-day money-back guarantee. That link again is getnativepath.com/crimelines for 45% off plus free shipping today, and you can go ahead and click that right in the show notes.
It's true that some things change as we get older. But if you're a woman over 40 and you're dealing with insomnia, brain fog, moodiness, and weight gain, you don't have to accept it as just another part of aging. And with MIDI Health, you can get help and stop pushing through it alone. The experts at MIDI understand that all these symptoms can be connected to the hormonal changes that happen around menopause. And MIDI can help you feel more like yourself again. Many healthcare providers aren't trained to treat or even recognize menopause symptoms. MIDI clinicians are menopause experts. They're dedicated to providing safe, effective, FDA-approved solutions for dozens of hormonal symptoms, not just hot flashes. Most importantly, they're covered by insurance. 91% of MIDI patients get relief from symptoms within just 2 months. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com.
The attention the video got, plus the publication of their names as persons of interest, did lead to tips coming in. Clerks at hotels in both Spencer and Ames, Iowa called the tip line to let them know that Aubrey and Bailey had recently stayed in their hotels. The investigators seemed to have barely missed them in Ames, where they packed up so quickly that they left things behind, including maps of Mexico. The FBI did FBI-type things with IP addresses and phone numbers and pings and managed to narrow down the video post as having come from a track phone that had no subscriber information. But phone records showed that that phone had recently called a hotel in the Branson, Missouri area, so the FBI sent a local deputy to that hotel to see if the vehicle they believed Bailey and Aubrey were in was there, and it was. So they moved in, and on November 30th, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. The two did end up being quickly charged with crimes, but not related to Sydney's disappearance. Aubrey mentioned in that video I played that they had a successful antique business, but the word business is doing a lot of heavy lifting. The two were actually running a massive con job. They would get themselves dressed up, show up at antique shows with a letter of guarantee that was a forgery, and buy things with bad checks. They would then be out of town before anyone caught on, and then they would sell the stolen items. Their business was running a profit because they weren't paying for any of their goods. The federal government came in, taking jurisdiction, and ended up filing charges against both of them since they had run their scheme in Kansas and then crossed the state line into Nebraska to sell things. In that case, they would eventually plead guilty and be ordered to pay $400,000 in restitution if you want to get an idea of the scope of what they were doing. Because those federal charges were pending, the authorities could hold Bailey and Aubrey without charging them in Sydney's case until they got more evidence. They were still going through a large amount of data like cell phone records, CCTV footage, and receipts that they had in hopes they would figure out what happened to Sydney and, if she had been killed as they suspected, where they may have left her. Would these two con artists be so sloppy as to leave a digital footprint clear enough to lead the investigators to a body? And it turned out they would be because they brought their phones with them. On November 16th, according to cell records, both Aubrey and Bailey left their apartment at 2:24 in the afternoon. They traveled several miles down a gravel road with indications that they slowed down and even stopped in some spots. They then returned home at 5:45. So the police went out to that stretch of road and started searching on December 4th, focusing on the areas where it looked like they had stopped. And that's when they started to find trash bags. On December 4th and 5th, the authorities recovered multiple trash bags of dismembered body parts from multiple locations. The victim was obviously female, and based on a tattoo Sydney had on her forearm, they were able to identify the remains as 24-year-old Sydney Loofe. In all, she had been cut into 14 pieces, 13 of which were recovered. Based on what was observed at the autopsy, she had been bound at the wrists at some point, and the cause of death was strangulation. Over a series of searches, more items were recovered along the path that Bailey and Aubrey's phones had traveled. This included tarps with blood on them, latex gloves, pajama pants that they had a photo of Bailey wearing, an extension cord, some of Sydney's clothing, and a flat bed sheet that matched the fitted sheet they had taken from the basement apartment. And Sydney's DNA would be on many of the items. They would also eventually find Sydney's driver's license and credit card that had been cut up, parts of her cell phone that had been broken, and her keys. With all of this evidence and more that came in, the investigators built out quite the timeline of what happened. It was reported in fragments, mostly like, here's all the cell phone evidence and here's the CCTV evidence. So what I decided to do was take the categories of evidence and just put them on one long timeline, since that is what we do here. And we're going to start with November 14th, 2017, the day of the first date. The messages between Bailey and Sydney that the investigators subpoenaed from Tinder are consistent with getting to know each other and setting up a first date. Is it going to just be us there? Who's driving? What's your address? That sort of thing. 1 minute after getting a message with Sydney's address, Bailey did a search for it, and then within 5 minutes, she had made a hotel reservation for a hotel near Sydney's home and work. According to CCTV footage, Aubrey and Bailey checked into that hotel room before Bailey left and went and picked Sydney up. Sydney did not go to the hotel based on cell data, but rather she and Bailey appeared to just drive around Lincoln for 2 hours. After dropping Sydney off at her apartment at 7:15, Bailey then went to the hotel and she and Aubrey spent the night. The next morning, November 15th, Aubrey and Bailey left the hotel and went to Home Depot at 10:25 a.m. There, they brought drop cloths, a hacksaw, a utility knife, extra blades, and tin snips. At 11:30, they went to an antique mall in Lincoln where Aubrey was known to be a seller, and he and Bailey picked up a check for some items that had been sold, and then they bought 2 food grinders, a weed cutter, and a folding saw. Cell phone records then show Aubrey and Bailey drove to Sydney's apartment. The time they were there would coincide with when Sydney would have left to make it to work in time. And Aubrey and Bailey's cell phones then traveled from the apartment to Sydney's job right behind her. So basically, they were stalking her. Sydney was seen on Menard's CCTV footage walking into the store, and 4 minutes later, Aubrey Trail walked in. The footage inside the store showed that the two walked by each other as Sydney walked out to go to her station at the guard booth, and she did not acknowledge Aubrey in any way, but he glanced in her direction as she walked by and then looked back to look at her again. Lining this up with cell phone records, Aubrey then called Bailey right after this. She was sitting in the car in the parking lot. Aubrey then bought a chemical drain cleaner, an air freshener, a long cotton cord, a thermometer, lighters, and protein bars from Menard's and left. Cell phone records show that they went back to their apartment in Wilbur, while CCTV and witnesses confirm that Sydney stayed at work. At 5 p.m., Bailey then went to the Dollar General near her apartment to buy bleach and trash bags, as well as laundry detergent. At 6 p.m., Bailey left Wilbur and went to pick Sydney up. At 6:54 p.m., Bailey messaged Sydney one word, here. At 7:11 p.m., Bailey called Aubrey, and then at about 8 p.m., Bailey and Sydney arrived at the apartment in Wilbur. Around 8:30, Sydney's cell phone pinged off a tower for the last time. At some point at or after 10 p.m., the landlord's son returned home and didn't hear anything unusual from the basement apartment. The next day, Bailey went back to the Dollar General to buy more bleach and more drain cleaner before she went to a local grocery store for more trash bags and then, again, more bleach. And then, as we know, they left at 2:24 p.m., drove down the gravel road in rural Clay County where Sydney's remains would be found, along with a ton of evidence, and then they returned back to Wilbur at 5:45. Now, this timeline does not only make Aubrey and Bailey look guilty, it makes it look like this was planned, with the purchases of things like bleach and saws hours before Sydney even went missing. The case was then bolstered by Aubrey Trail's inability to stop talking. In several interviews with the media and with the investigators, he gave a handful of stories. Aubrey did warn the FBI that 50% of what he said was BS, so I guess it's up to them to figure out which parts weren't, but he was more or less consistent on 2 factors. 1, Bailey Boswell was not involved in the actual killing, and 2, that Sydney's death was an accident during consensual erotic asphyxiation. In one version of the story, it happened as part of a threesome, and then in another story, it was actually Aubrey making home porn movies for people, and this was part of that. He said he had been paid to essentially make a snuff film, and it was him, 2 other women, and Sydney willingly participating in this. Sydney, according to him, knew that he was going to strangle her until she lost consciousness as part of the film, and she agreed to do it for $5,000. But Aubrey said Bailey was not in the room during it and was not part of the film. However, he refused to name the other two women or produce the supposed video he made. His comments to the media would be similar in being these vague, almost confessions, but the media and the FBI were not the only people he was communicating with. He had found a way to communicate with Bailey. They were both being held in the Saline County Jail before Aubrey was transferred to the federal system, and while they would not see each other and were kept apart, the jail had a shared common area. Now, Bailey would get to use it during her pod's usual time, first thing in the morning, and Aubrey was allowed to use it after lockdown at night since he was being held in solitary. So he was the last one there at night, and she was the first one there in the morning, and being a shared space, even if not a shared time, gave them the opportunity to exchange notes. In March of 2018, an employee at the jail found a note in a phone book in the library that said, "I love you," and it had a reference to cutting up and bagging up drugs. This was later believed to have been for Bailey, and the cutting up, bagging up reference was not for drugs, but rather for Sydney's body. Then in July, there was a check of the common area when a note was found stuck to the door with toothpaste. This one was written in code. They searched Bailey's pod that day and found more letters as well as the key to the code. And basically, most of the letters appear to have been Aubrey trying to give Bailey the story that he was going to feed to the authorities so that they could get on the same page. He told her to tell them that they were making these fantasy films for people, but that no one was supposed to get hurt. But she realized it was all a lie, and now she knew that Aubrey actually planned to kill someone all along, but that was never something she intended. He was attempting to give her a get out of jail free story, a go ahead and throw me under the bus story. But the truth was Bailey wasn't really talking to the authorities like he was. We know that some things Aubrey told the media and the authorities during his confessions were true. Like he's the one who led them to where they found some of Sydney's things. But at the core of it, they did not believe it was true that this was an accident for a number of reasons, including the witness statements of 3 women who had been involved with the pair prior and during this time. The authorities found them mostly because they went on Tinder to see who Bailey, posing as Audrey, talked to, and these women were located. I'm only going to use their first names for their privacy because the details they have are pretty sensitive. The first woman was a 20-year-old named Ashley, and she said she connected with Bailey on the dating app in July of 2017. Bailey told her she was in a sugar daddy relationship with Aubrey, and Ashley was invited to become kind of a triad relationship with them. Ashley said that Aubrey would give her an allowance and she would have to follow some rules, like how many nights she had to stay in the apartment with them, how often she had to check in with Aubrey by phone, and she also had to help with the antiques business as needed. There was, of course, a sexual component to this relationship in a dominant, submissive way, where Ashley was supposed to be submissive to Aubrey, but she was really submissive to both of them. Ashley said that Aubrey and Bailey would talk to her about sexual torture and also about witchcraft. As the story went, Aubrey was a vampire who controlled a group of 12 witches, with Bailey being the queen witch of the 12. Ashley never met the other 11 women because, well, they didn't exist, but if she wanted to join as the 13th witch in the coven, she would have to inhale someone else's last breath. And that's when the talk of killing someone started. In August of 2017, Aubrey took Bailey and Ashley to the store where they met up with a young woman that Bailey had met on the dating app. Aubrey talked to the woman, and after she left, Aubrey asked Ashley if she wanted that woman to be her first kill. Ashley said yes. But then Aubrey later said the woman went out of state, so they would have to find someone else. Aubrey told Ashley that before she could kill someone, she would need her own kill bag, and showed her what he said was his. Inside was a sauna suit and a hammer, and the sauna suit rang true to the investigators in Sydney's case because a sauna suit with the crotch cut out was found among the items thrown out by Bailey and Aubrey when they disposed of Sydney's body. The reason to wear this suit was to avoid getting blood or other forensic evidence on your body and clothing. Towards the end of the summer, Ashley met another young woman, Anastasia, who was in a similar type of relationship with Aubrey and Bailey. She had to follow the rules, he was the sugar daddy, all that, and we'll get into Anastasia's story in a minute, but Ashley said that the four of them, Aubrey, Bailey, Ashley, and Anastasia, all went on a trip together, and not long after that, Aubrey and Bailey started talking about wanting to kill Anastasia. Aubrey because she wasn't evil enough, and Bailey because she found Anastasia annoying. After a few months in this unusual relationship, Ashley said she suddenly realized just how off it was. She referred to it as snapping back into reality. She ended up leaving the relationship but was threatened that they would hurt her and her family if she told anyone about it. And the it referred to the nature of the relationship, the talking about killing or torturing people, and the illegal antique stealing. Anastasia, however, stayed in the relationship a little longer, and she was even younger than Ashley, barely out of high school. And her story was so much like Ashley's with the talk of witchcraft, torture, killing, even the sugar daddy rules were the same. One of the only differences was that in Ashley's situation, Aubrey would be the one to punish her with physical violence if she didn't follow the rules, and with Anastasia, Bailey was the enforcer. Anastasia was not into all this talk about torture and murder and left in mid-October 2017, and she left under the same threats Ashley did. If she told anyone about any of it, she and her family would be killed. But not long after she left, we have the third witness, 21-year-old Caitlin, coming into the picture. She met Bailey on Tinder just a couple of weeks before Bailey messaged Sydney for the first time, and she was still in this relationship with them at the time Sydney disappeared. And the relationship followed the same pattern as before, and when they started talking about killing somebody, Bailey told Caitlin that a woman was actually stalking her. She wanted to know if Caitlin would kill for her, and this conversation happened on November 13th. That is, after Bailey started talking to Sydney on the app, but before their first date. That same night, Caitlin said that Bailey wanted her to describe torture techniques while they were having sex. Caitlin stayed that night, but went home on the 14th with plans to see Bailey and Aubrey on the 16th. But on the 15th, while out shopping at the hardware store before picking Sydney up for the second date, Bailey texted Caitlin and said she would be busy for the next few days. On November 17th, Aubrey and Bailey picked Caitlin up and they went to a casino in Iowa. Bailey showed Caitlin a picture and said that was the woman who was stalking her, who she needed help killing. Caitlin said she tried to say no, but then Aubrey made some threatening statements towards her, telling her that she had to prove herself to him, and she said okay out of fear. According to Caitlin, the plan to kill somebody wasn't something in the vague future. They started planning right away, with them even saying they had to trade out cars with Caitlin's car and have Caitlin drive them. So 2 days after Sydney supposedly accidentally died, and 1 day after they dismembered and discarded her remains, they were already talking about killing the next person. After Caitlin complied with their request that she take her car and showed a willingness to kill with them, Aubrey said she proved her loyalty and didn't actually have to participate. The two then had Caitlin drive them nearly across the state of Nebraska for what they said was a drug deal, and on the drive, Aubrey and Bailey seemed tense and would have quiet arguments. Caitlin had no idea what it was about. They were together on November 21st when Bailey talked to Caitlin during sex about dismembering people. The next day, Aubrey and Bailey had Caitlin drive them out to Kearney, Nebraska, which is about 2 hours from Lincoln. During that drive, Aubrey kept talking about killing someone, saying he wanted to watch Bailey and Caitlin kill a college student, preferably one who was an exchange student, because then their family wouldn't notice when they didn't make it home for the Thanksgiving holiday. Caitlin did not want to participate, but tried to just keep calm and act like everything was fine just because she was afraid that they would kill her. While they were in Kearney, Nebraska, Caitlin got a voicemail from the Lincoln police. Apparently, she had not been in touch with her family during these days of driving Aubrey and Bailey around Nebraska, and her mother reported her missing. Aubrey told her to turn off her phone, and then they told Caitlin that Bailey was being falsely accused of being involved in the disappearance of a young woman just because she was the last person seen with her. Caitlin said Bailey cried when she talked about it and insisted she wasn't involved in anything. Aubrey and Bailey quickly checked out of the hotel that they had barely checked into and let Caitlin go home, likely because her mother called the police. And thank goodness she did. I mean, if they're driving around looking for someone to kill and they had Caitlin right there, or if they found somebody and then Caitlin hesitated to participate, I think that call to the police very well saved Caitlin's life.
The new year's here. It's the perfect time to refresh those household essentials and score some cashback rewards with Colgate-Palmolive. From toothpaste to dish soap, chances are you've got Colgate-Palmolive products on your shopping list and in your house right now. We're talking brands like Colgate, Soft Soap, Palmolive, Irish Spring, Fabuloso, and Tom's of Maine. And right now, you can get up to a $10 digital Visa prepaid card when you buy up to $30 of Colgate-Palmolive products. Here's how it works. Spend $20 on their products, get $5. Spend $30, get a $10 reward. All you do is shop your favorite brands, snap a pic of your receipt, and upload it to cprewards.com. It's so easy. That's cprewards.com. So grab what you need, or maybe try something new, and get rewarded just for doing your usual shopping. And start your year fresh by earning cashback rewards with Colgate-Palmolive. Rewards available while supplies last. Limits apply. U.S. only. 1/1/25 through 3/31/25. For full terms and conditions, visit cprewards.com.
With the best all-inclusive vacation deals to Mexico and the Caribbean, booking your getaway with Cheap Caribbean Vacations means you have more freedom to do your deal. Whether you want to enjoy snorkeling, endless margaritas, and more, or simply soak up the sun and sand in a tropical paradise, Cheap Caribbean Vacations has your deal for that. Plan and book the exact getaway you want at exactly the right price for you by using our exclusive budget beach finder, or find a featured all-inclusive package to Oasis Hotels and Resorts and do your deal at cheapcaribbean.com.
So all of these pieces that we've gone over, the timeline, the evidence at the scene, and these women's testimonies were what was needed to charge them. So on June 11th, 2018, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were formally charged with the murder of Sydney Loofe, and the state announced they were seeking the death penalty. They did not believe Aubrey that this was an accident or that Bailey was not involved, and they were also charged with conspiracy and improper disposal of human remains. Bailey pleaded not guilty on all 3 counts, but Aubrey, who went to trial first in June of 2019, pleaded guilty to one of the charges, improper disposal of human remains. This was a defense strategy, and they hoped that if he admitted to that part, the state wouldn't be allowed to show the jury the worst of the crime scene photos. Then at trial, in defending him against the murder charge, the defense basically stuck to what Aubrey had already confessed to, and that was that the death was accidental and he made the wrong choice by how he covered it up. But the state used the testimony of Ashley, Anastasia, and Caitlin to show that Aubrey had been talking about killing someone for months before Sydney's death and even after. And then there were all the purchases. He and Bailey bought the saws and bleach while Sydney was alive and well. And actually, they bought the hacksaw and extra blades and tin snips and a utility knife and 2 meat grinders, as well as drop cloths, rope, drain cleaner, trash bags, and roasting pans. It's quite handy that they just so happened to buy all of those things before Aubrey unintentionally killed someone and needed to dismember the body. Aubrey would end up not hearing a lot of the testimony against him firsthand, in part due to a stunt he pulled during the trial. As one witness was leaving the courtroom and another had just been sworn in, Aubrey suddenly blurted out, "Bailey is innocent and I curse you all," and then, with a razor he somehow smuggled in, he slashed at his throat 3 or 4 times. While he drew blood and his defense said he needed a couple of stitches, Aubrey didn't cut deep enough to do any real damage. Court was recessed for the day, and he was treated at the hospital. Aubrey's defense wanted the judge to declare a mistrial, but it's not common that the defendant's actions can cause one. You have a right to prejudice the jury against yourself. But sometimes if what happened was just so egregious, they will grant one if they don't think the jury can come back from it and remain open-minded. The judge spoke to all of the jurors individually and decided to let the trial continue, though Aubrey opted not to attend the rest of the state's case. He was present during the defense case so that he could testify against his legal counsel's advice. Aubrey started his testimony by saying that 85% of the state's case was correct. He even admitted that he and Bailey did talk about torture and murder fantasies with the other women, but he said it was only because their house was somewhere where people could talk about those things and not be judged, but it was all just fantasy, as was the talk of witchcraft. Aubrey said he pulled all of that out of a fiction book he had read where the characters would torture people for magical powers. While Aubrey believed in the idea of spiritual witches and vampires, he didn't believe it literally, and it was just some type of make-believe they were all engaging in. And then Aubrey got to the part of the story that he said the state had all wrong. He testified that he and Bailey did not meet Sydney on the dating app in November. He had actually met her in the spring of 2017 at her work, and Bailey met her a week later. According to his testimony, Sydney and Bailey dated for several months, and Sydney was even working for Aubrey's antiques business. But Sydney broke things off with Aubrey and Bailey in September because she did not like their schemes. And then in November, Bailey was on Tinder when she came across Sydney's profile. Because Bailey was using a fake name and had different pictures up, she reached out to Sydney hoping that she didn't notice it was her, and she didn't until Bailey picked her up for the first date. Sydney was initially upset when she saw Bailey there, but they drove around and Bailey tried to talk her into coming back to be with her and Aubrey. Ashley and Anastasia had just left and they wanted Sydney to rejoin. Sydney agreed to meet with Aubrey the next day to talk it out, and that was the second date. So according to Aubrey, Sydney had a secret relationship with them that nobody knew about, and when they were talking about rekindling it, she suddenly stopped wanting it to be a secret and started texting friends about it and sending pictures and posting about the date on Snapchat, because that makes total sense. Aubrey then continued with his completely believable story by saying that all of those things that he and Bailey bought on November 15th weren't in preparation for a planned murder and dismemberment. They were just things they needed to repair and clean antiques. That evening, Bailey picked Sydney up and brought her to the apartment so they could all talk it out. And according to Aubrey, Sydney did agree to have sex with him and Bailey that night and to experiment with erotic asphyxiation using an electrical cord. No, it was not part of a snuff film, and Aubrey even admitted that he sent those notes to Bailey in lockup to try to get her on board with the story that would mostly exonerate her. During what Aubrey claimed was consensual sex, Sydney had a seizure and stopped breathing. They did not call an ambulance because they both had warrants as well as drugs and stolen items in their apartment. As for Ashley's testimony about the woman in the store that was only not killed because she went out of state, Aubrey said that was a lie he told Ashley. He said he realized Ashley was crazy enough to actually kill someone and that they weren't just talking about fantasies, so he lied about her being unavailable. And then when it came to Caitlin's story about them looking for an exchange student to kill, he said again it was just talking about fantasies and no one made any moves to actually act on it. All of this talk about killing people that he had before and after he actually killed someone, all fantasy. On cross-examination, the state made several very good points, and one was that Aubrey's story of knowing Sydney for months was provably false. And it comes back to that CCTV footage of them crossing paths at Menards. They had been in some type of relationship for months over the summer of 2017, but she didn't recognize him when she walked right past him in the store. Another point the state made was that Aubrey's story that this was an accidental death was not the story he told when he was on the run. It wasn't the story he told in the first few days he was in custody. It didn't come out until after they found Sydney's remains and confronted him with this as a homicide, and that they could place his cell phone in the area where the body was found. So before they found the body, he was the victim of persecution and a frame job, but once they confirmed her death, suddenly he had a story. The defense did call a couple of witnesses who thought they saw Sydney with Aubrey and Bailey over the summer of 2017, but eyewitness testimony is not conclusive, and even if Aubrey knew Sydney since the day she was born, the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming thanks to all of those shopping trips. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. At sentencing, a panel of 3 judges found that the aggravating factor of exceptional depravity was present in multiple ways and that there was one non-statutory mitigating factor in Aubrey's favor, his abusive childhood. His parents had abused him and then abandoned him with his grandparents at the age of 2, and then when his mother remarried several years later, they took him back home, but the stepfather was just as abusive, and then he ended up back with his grandparents in foster homes, group homes, and juvenile detention. The judges found no statutory mitigating factors present, even though Aubrey's defense tried to argue one: that the victim was a participant in the defendant's conduct or consented to the act. The judges found that this did not exist, which is basically the same thing as saying they did not believe Aubrey at all. And then Aubrey did what he did so many times already, and he changed his story. In his statement before the sentence was handed down, Aubrey said that almost everything he said was a lie. He only told the truth when it benefited him, and Sydney did not die of erotic asphyxiation, and he did murder her. But he still denied planning it. He said he was trying to recruit her into the group, and as he told her what they did, like the illegal thefts and sales and swindles, as well as the sexual domination and group sex, Sydney freaked out. He killed her because he had told her and showed her too much. Aubrey said he had done some terrible things in his life, but this was the only one he felt real regret over. And then the judges sentenced him to death. Between the time of Aubrey's trial and his sentencing, Bailey Boswell's trial was held in October of 2020. Her defense was that she didn't do it, and that the jury needed to keep an open mind and not let the state sway them with emotion. If they found themselves being swayed that way, maybe it was the state making up for a weak case. The state's case against Bailey was similar to the case against Aubrey. They did nearly everything in lockstep according to CCTV and their cell phone pings, so that's to be expected that the cases would be similar. The defense presented their case through opening and closing statements and cross-examination and not through witnesses of their own. Bailey did not take the stand, and the result here was the same. She was found guilty of all of the charges. They then moved on to the penalty phase. The state argued the same aggravating factor, and the defense presented character witnesses for Bailey, mostly family members. They talked about how her life had been so promising and full when she was younger, but after being sexually assaulted in college and entering an abusive relationship with her daughter's father, things went sideways for her. After meeting Aubrey Trail, he took on the role of the dominant person in her life, and she was under his control. The defense also argued that the state had no arrangements to house Bailey on death row should they give her the death penalty, because Nebraska doesn't have a death row for women. Nebraska's Director of Correctional Services even testified that they would put a plan into place should they need one, but they didn't have one because Nebraska had never sentenced a woman to death. When speaking to the panel of judges herself, Bailey said Aubrey threatened her and threatened her daughter if she had ever left him, and she felt trapped in this abusive relationship. She was not the willing and enthusiastic participant she was made out to be. Bailey and her family also talked about the relationship she had with her daughter, and even though it was mostly just over the phone and sending letters, it meant something to her, and putting Bailey to death would then hurt her child. In the end, the panel of judges were split, 2 in favor of a death sentence and the third in favor of life. So Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In 2022, Aubrey Trail's direct appeal was denied, and then in August of 2023, he filed a petition with the state to set the date for his execution. He said that they gave him the death penalty and it was time to use it. His apology to Sydney's family would be not dragging this out in the appellate process. Put him to death, and then maybe they would have some type of closure. There were a few issues with this petition. First of all, the state, even if they wanted to grant this request, they have been having trouble getting the drugs necessary for lethal injections. So all of their death penalty cases are sort of paused right now until they can figure that part out. But the judge ended up not granting this motion for 2 main reasons. One is it's not up to Aubrey when his sentence is carried out. And 2, everyone he named in the motion were not people who could set an execution date. He left off the Supreme Court, who, by statute, is the one that sets the date. In December of 2023, Aubrey said he's going to go ahead with a post-conviction appeal of his sentence. This was not a reversal of his request that they set an execution date, but he figured if he had to sit on death row anyway and they weren't going to execute him, he might as well move ahead with his appeals. If they made a path forward for him to be executed sooner, he said he would drop the appeal. But this appeal, no appeal again, wasn't the only thing putting Aubrey in the newspapers while he was behind bars. And this is because he went and ran another con. This one was actually extortion. It started with a woman named Samantha Al-Rakabi who told Aubrey that she was planning to write a book on the Sidney Loofe murder. He agreed to cooperate and do interviews with her, and so she began visiting him in prison. Separately, Aubrey had met a nurse who worked at the reception and treatment center who he befriended. The details are vague, but he had eventually managed to manipulate her into getting him contraband items, things like a cell phone and tobacco. During the time Aubrey spent with the nurse, she had revealed that she had a troubled relationship with her husband. So Aubrey came up with a scheme. He told the nurse that he hired a hitman to kill her husband. If she wanted to stop the plan that was in motion, she would have to pay him $25,000. Samantha then went with the nurse to the bank to withdraw the money. This happened in 2021, and Samantha was arrested for extortion in September of 2023. Samantha's defense was that Aubrey had manipulated her into participating in the scheme. She apparently had a son who was incarcerated, and she feared that Aubrey would kill him or have him killed if she didn't help. But the recorded phone conversations between her and Aubrey that were, of course, recorded because it's a prison line, definitely sound more like she was impressed or even bragging about how they were able to get the nurse willing to cash out her own pension to hand the money over to them. In the end, Samantha took a plea deal where the charges would eventually be dropped when she paid restitution, which she did, and the case was officially closed a couple months ago in December of 2024. That happens to also be the latest status update on the current post-conviction appeal that Aubrey has going on that is now working its way through the system. And while Aubrey Trail was busy playing his games behind bars, Bailey Boswell also filed her own direct appeal, largely stating 2 trial errors. One was showing the jury photos of Sidney's dismembered body, and the other was the testimony of the 3 women who talked about the occult, torture, and murder fantasies. In May of 2024, the conviction was upheld. After the dust settled a bit on this truly awful case, Sidney's family worked with the organization Set Me Free to set up a scholarship in Sidney's name. Set Me Free is an anti-trafficking organization, and the scholarship is available to Nebraska high school students who plan to go to college to make an impact on the community in the areas of countering human trafficking, working with online safety, and also cybersecurity. I am going to leave a link to the organization in the show notes where you can donate to Set Me Free. I will also leave a link to Rain's guide for safer online dating. Sidney did some of the things they suggest, like telling her friends she was going out on a date and on a second date, and sending a picture to a friend. Had she not done that, how long would it have taken the police to find Bailey Boswell? The truth is that as we go through life, we need to be able to trust people or we'd never do anything. That said, there are different things we can do to protect ourselves in different scenarios, and one of those is with online dating. So if you are looking to protect both your personal safety and your privacy while dating online, that link to the RAIN tips will be in the show notes. And I hope you don't just click on it, but you also share it with your friends and your family because you really don't know who can be saved from harm with this information. It is time for February birthday shoutouts, and I am recording this in the depths of an Arctic blast right now, so I am in full February vibes. I just want to be warm and cozy and not outside. But I'm going to dig deep for some warm greetings and birthday wishes for my February Patreon birthday supporters. First, we have the February Jens. I am telling you, we have Jen M, Jenny, Jen A, and Jennifer Lynn. Then we also have Alyssa, Emily, Sarah, Kat, Laura, Doriana, Alex, Greg, and Christina. You know I believe in celebrating all month long, and February being a little bit shorter means you just have to celebrate extra hard every day. So from me to you, I want to say happy birthday.